When a homeless youth shouted, "Don't eat that!" no one in the elegant dining room of the Riverside Bistro could have predicted what would unfold. Tucked away amid centuries-old oak trees and a glimmering water fountain in the heart of a refined district of Westbridge, the bistro was a magnet for the city's most influential citizens. It was a bright midday, and the bistro bustled with life. Waiters in crisp navy uniforms glided effortlessly between tables laden with artisan cuisine and perfectly brewed coffee, while the warm aroma of freshly baked sourdough mingled with the delicate perfume of nearby roses. Yet for one man, none of this grandeur stirred his soul. At a prime table in the center of the dining room sat Charles Hargrove, a man whose very name was synonymous with power and legacy. Now 75 years old, Charles had built his vast empire from the ground up, starting with modest investments in commercial properties during his 20s and eventually expanding into ventures that only a handful could ever dream of. Even at his age, he exuded an air of calm authority. His tailored charcoal suit and classic gold-rimmed spectacles reflected decades of wealth and influence. As he perused the menu with slow, deliberate movements that betrayed a hint of hesitation, his expression remained unreadable. Directly across from him sat his much younger wife, Diana. At 38 years old, Diana seemed to have stepped straight out of a glossy fashion spread. Her glossy raven hair framed an impossibly flawless face. Her scarlet lipstick was applied with meticulous care, and every facet of her appearance screamed refined elegance. Yet there was a peculiar coldness in her eyes, and as she absent-mindedly twirled an exquisitely crafted diamond bracelet on her wrist, it was clear that her smile failed to reach her heart. Outside, just beyond the wide patio glass, lingered a young boy whose presence was hardly noticed by the well-heeled diners. Andre, a 15-year-old street kid clad in an oversized threadbare hoodie and scuffed sneakers, shifted restlessly near the bistro's boundary. His dark eyes flitted from one polished table to the next, silently observing the lavish plates and pockets bulging with money, as if searching for an opportunity in a world where he felt perpetually excluded. Though none of the patrons recognized him, his face was no stranger on these city streets. A figure forever on the fringes of adult conversation, an uninvited spectator to luxury. As the bustling environment of Riverside Bistro continued unabated, Charles Hargrove glanced at his watch and murmured to his wife in a measured tone, "You're distracted again." His voice carried both a calm command and an undercurrent of reproach. Diana lifted her gaze, offering him a smile that was polished but devoid of any real warmth. "I'm right here," she replied softly. Then, in an act that would soon send shockwaves through the elegant establishment, she reached across the table and almost imperceptibly slipped her hand into her designer handbag. There, hidden among meticulously arranged items, her fingers closed around a small, sleek vial. With a casual flick of her wrist, she twisted the vial's cap and tilted it ever so slightly over the pristine white bowl of soup before her husband. In an instant, the clear liquid dissolved into the steaming broth as if it had never existed. Andre, leaning silently against the wrought iron railing that bordered the patio, froze in disbelief. His heart thundered in his chest as his eyes widened. He had seen every detail with stark clarity. Slowly, his stomach growled, a reminder of his own hunger, as he watched Diana stir the soup with a delicate spoon. Her expression remained unchanged, a mask of nonchalance that belied the gravity of her action. Then, as if in a daze, the boy's mind reeled at the possibility. Could it be true? Could a woman who appeared so flawless and polished in the opulent surroundings of Riverside Bistro be doing something as sinister as tampering with a meal? For several agonizing moments, Andre crouched low behind the safety of the railing. His mind raced with uncertainty and fear. The world around him, filled with the chatter of patrons, the clinking of silverware, and the hum of gentle conversation, seemed oblivious to his inner turmoil. He was a mere shadow at the edge of an exclusive domain, a threadbare presence in a tapestry woven with luxury. Yet the truth of what he had witnessed weighed on him heavily. His instincts screamed at him to turn away, to retreat back into the anonymity that had always defined his existence. But the urgency of the moment, combined with a fierce sense of justice born from years of survival on the city's rough streets, propelled him into action. Without a second thought, Andre pushed himself off the railing with determination that belied his frail appearance. His legs, heavy as lead from hunger and weariness, moved resolutely as he marched directly toward the table at the center of the bistro. His voice, shaky yet filled with a raw urgency, rang out over the din. "Don't eat that!" Immediately, the bustling atmosphere stilled as every head turned in unison. A fork clattered to the floor, its sound echoing through the now silent restaurant. Charles Hargrove froze mid-mashon, his spoon hovering just inches away from his lips. His wide, incredulous eyes locked onto the small, resolute figure before him. Diana whipped her head around, her expression twisting from coy indifference to hardened fury. "What did you just say?" she demanded, her voice slicing through the silence like shattered glass. The insult in her tone was unmistakable as she glared down at the boy, her eyes narrowing dangerously. Andre, though his voice trembled with the weight of his revelation, stood his ground. "I saw you," he declared firmly, each word measured and insistent. "You put something in your food when you weren't looking. Don't eat it." His words reverberated through the stunned silence, and a murmur of shock rippled among the nearby diners. Charles glanced between Andre and his wife, confusion and disbelief etched into every line of his face. "What is he talking about?" he asked in a low, measured tone. His gaze flicked between the two, a silent battle waging in his eyes. Diana's composure shattered in an instant. Her polished facade crumbled as she leapt to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the stone floor. "You little liar," he hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "How dare you accuse me of something so vile? Who even let you in here?" Her words, aimed as much at the crowd as at the boy, stung deeply. The ambient chatter of the bistro died down even further as patrons exchanged incredulous glances. Some whispered, their voices trembling with a mixture of shock and disapproval. Others recorded the unfolding drama on their smartphones, capturing every charged moment. In that tense atmosphere, Charles Hargrove's face paled as he stared down at his untouched bowl of soup. His hand trembled slightly as he set the spoon aside, caught in the maelstrom of uncertainty. "What exactly is going on here?" he demanded, his voice low and resolute. Diana's mask of elegant composure cracked even more visibly as she waved a dismissive hand, attempting to brush off the boy's accusations. "This is absurd," she snapped coldly. "He's just a street kid looking for attention. You must be overreacting." Her tone, icy and condescending, drew further disapproval from the growing crowd. Andre stepped even closer, his fists clenching at his sides as he spoke again. "I'm not lying," he said, his voice rising despite the fear in his eyes. "I saw everything. I saw you do it, and if you let him eat that soup, you'll regret it." Charles's jaw tightened as he shifted his attention back to the bowl. His eyes, once full of the assuredness of a man who had built an empire, now betrayed a deep uncertainty. With a heavy sigh, he glanced back and forth between Andre and Diana. "Diana, you've been acting strange for weeks now," he said softly, his tone laced with a mixture of sorrow and exasperation. "What is going on here?" Diana's face flushed, and for a brief moment she stuttered as if searching for words to defend herself. I don't know what you mean," she managed weakly, her eyes darting nervously to the watching crowd. "You can't really believe that I'd poison you, can you?" Her voice cracked, and the tension in the room became almost unbearable. Just then, the murmurs among the patrons intensified as a chorus of disbelieving voices filled the space. "She put something in your soup," a diner whispered to another, and soon enough, the entire bistro seemed to pulse with a single, rising question. Could it be true? As the atmosphere grew heavier and more charged, Andre felt the weight of every pair of eyes fixed upon him. His heart pounded so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it, yet he refused to back down. In that moment, he recalled every hardship he had endured on the streets, each day marked by neglect and the indifference of a society that overlooked the forgotten. His determination surged, and he declared once more, "I'm telling the truth, please don't let him eat that soup. You can even smell it if you're not sure." His words, simple yet profound, seemed to hang in the air, as time itself slowed. Charles's expression wavered between disbelief and dawning realization. His gaze hardened as he searched Diana's face for any sign of deception, but all he found was a mask of growing desperation. The bistro, once filled with the gentle hum of conversation and clinking glassware, now felt as if suspended in a heavy, oppressive silence. Even the soft strains of the piano in the corner had died away, replaced by a palpable tension that weighed on every soul present. Before Charles could utter another word, Diana's composure shattered completely. In a fit of anger, she stood abruptly, her chair scraping harshly against the polished floor. "You little liar!" she screamed, her voice echoing off the walls. "How dare you accuse me in front of everyone? Who do you think you are?" Her tone was venomous, her eyes flashing with fury as she glared down at André. Despite the overwhelming pressure and the disbelief swirling around him, André's resolve did not falter. He took another step forward, his fists trembling but his voice growing steadier with every word. "I'm not jealous or looking for trouble. I'm simply telling the truth. I saw you pour something into the soup when you weren't looking." His declaration, raw and unfiltered, caused gasps to ripple through the room. Patrons leaned forward, their curiosity mingled with shock as they watched this unlikely confrontation unfold before them. Charles's gaze alternated between his distraught wife and the determined young boy. The internal conflict was evident. Here was a man who had spent his entire life mastering the art of reading people, yet now he was caught in a situation where his intuition clashed with the polished facade of his closest companion. "What exactly did you see?" he asked finally, his voice low and almost pleading. André's eyes narrowed as he recounted the moment with painstaking clarity. "I saw you adjust your glasses and pick up your phone, and then I saw your wife." He paused, swallowing hard as the room's silence seemed to press in around him. "I saw her hand slip into her handbag. I saw her fingers close around a small vial, and then she twisted it open and poured its contents into the soup. I know what I saw." His words, spoken with trembling certainty, reverberated through the stunned crowd. At that, Diana's eyes widened momentarily before hardening into a mask of denial. "This is absurd," she spat, her voice quivering with indignation. "I wouldn't do such a thing. You're just trying to cause trouble." She shot a venomous glance at André, as if to intimidate him further. "Honestly, you're nothing but a street kid trying to get attention. Who would believe you?" Her words dripped with condescension, yet they did little to mask the underlying desperation in her tone. Charles's hand, which had been hovering uncertainly over his bowl of soup, began to tremble visibly. His usually steely gaze now wavered as doubt crept in. "Diana," he said quietly, almost to himself, "what is it that you're doing? I can't imagine you would ever—" His voice faltered, the weight of the revelation settling in. The entire bistro was now silent, every patron caught in the grip of an unfolding drama that none could have foreseen. Amid the tension, a low murmur began to spread among the diners. Whispers turned to exclamations. Eyes darted nervously from one table to another. Even the waitstaff, who had been bustling about moments before, paused, as if sensing that something irreparable was at stake. A sense of collective disbelief, as if the very fabric of their refined world had been ripped apart by a single, unyielding act of defiance, filled the room. As the seconds ticked by in agonizing slowness, Charles finally lifted his head, his eyes meeting Diana's with a mixture of hurt and determination. "Diana, you said—" he began, but before he could complete his sentence, Diana's face twisted in anger. "I can't believe you're even asking me that," she snapped, rising to her feet abruptly. "I have no idea what you're insinuating." Her voice rose, cutting through the silence with the force of a scorned accusation. "Who would even let a kid like you into our world?" she added, her tone a blend of disdain and panic as the reality of the situation began to overwhelm her carefully constructed facade. It was then that, in the midst of this escalating confrontation, a low murmur of discontent reached the ears of a nearby waiter, whose face had been pale with apprehension. "Sir, should I call the police?" he ventured tentatively, his voice barely audible above the rising tension. The question sent a ripple of shock through the assembled crowd. For a brief moment, even Diana's eyes widened in genuine panic. "Don't you dare!" she managed to choke out, her voice shaking with a mixture of fury and desperation. "This is just a misunderstanding," she insisted, her words faltering as she realized that the bistro's patrons were now fixated on the scene like hawks. Charles raised his hand, silencing her protest as he addressed the waiter with quiet authority. "Yes, call them." His tone was calm, almost detached, yet laced with the gravity of a man forced to confront an unimaginable betrayal. The waiter hurried away, leaving Charles to cast a long, pained look at Diana, his once trusted partner, now transformed into a figure of chilling deceit. In that moment, the elegant veneer of Riverside Bistro seemed to fracture, revealing a raw undercurrent of injustice that rippled through every table and whispered into every ear. Andre, still standing resolute at the edge of the scene, could feel his heart pounding like a war drum. Every second seemed to stretch into an eternity as he watched the drama unfold before him. His stomach churned with anxiety and his fists clenched tightly, but his gaze remained unwavering. "Please, sir," he called out again, his voice soft yet insistent. "I'm telling the truth. Don't let him eat that soup." His words, imbued with an urgency born of hardship and a deep-rooted desire for justice, resonated with a truth that no one could ignore. Charles's eyes flicked between his distraught wife and the determined young boy. For a long moment silence reigned, heavy and suffocating. Finally, with an effort that seemed to shake the very foundations of his belief in the people around him, Charles leaned back in his chair and his voice, barely above a whisper, said, "You said you saw her do it." His tone was not accusatory, but laced with a sorrow that spoke of long years of disappointment and the bitter taste of betrayal. "I did not expect this," he murmured, as if the words themselves were an admission of defeat. At that moment, Diana's carefully constructed mask of elegance crumbled entirely. With a sudden burst of anger, she sprang to her feet, her chair toppling noisily behind her. "You dare accuse me?" she shouted, her voice rising to a level that silenced the murmurs in the room. "How dare you humiliate me in front of everyone?" Her eyes flashed with a mixture of fury and desperation as she advanced on the table, her every movement exuding a cold, calculated menace. "This is preposterous," she spat, "just a kid playing at being a hero." But even as Diana's words sliced through the silence, Charles's gaze hardened with a dawning realization. He stared at the bowl of soup as if it were the embodiment of his shattered trust. Slowly, his expression turned from one of dismay to steely determination. "Diana," he said softly, his voice low and resolute, "I don't understand how you could risk everything for this. For something so reckless." His tone was gentle, yet carried the weight of a man whose life had been built on a foundation of trust and discernment. As if to punctuate his disbelief, Diana's face contorted with bitter sarcasm. "Oh, please," she retorted icily, "don't act like you're not aware of everything. It's always been about control, hasn't it? About proving that you can't be wrong even when the truth stares you in the face." Her words hung in the air, charged with the venom of long-held grudges, and for a moment, the bistro's opulent calm gave way to an atmosphere of charged hostility. The tension reached its apex when, without warning, Diana's eyes narrowed and she lunged toward Charles, her hand reaching out to grab his wrist in a desperate bid to maintain her crumbling authority. "You are not going anywhere tonight," she hissed, her grip surprisingly strong for a woman who prided herself on elegance. "Not until we settle this matter once and for all." The force of her words reverberated through the room, and the collective gasp of onlookers underscored the severity of the situation. Just then, as if summoned by the escalating drama, a waiter, who had until now stood silently frozen in place, stepped forward, his voice trembling as he addressed the gathering with cautious authority. "Sir, should I call the police?" he asked, his tone laced with a mixture of fear and duty. His words sent a shudder of disbelief through the assembled diners, who now watched the scene with bated breath. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the buzz of conversation and the clink of cutlery ceased entirely, replaced by a silence so profound it was almost palpable. Charles's eyes darted between the trembling boy and his enraged wife, and for a moment the grand facade of Riverside Bistro appeared to falter under the weight of raw, unfiltered truth. "Call them," he said quietly, his voice carrying a tremor of resignation that belied his towering stature. As the waiter hurried away, Diana's face contorted in a mixture of fear and anger, and the once grand dining room became the stage for a confrontation that would leave its mark on everyone present. Anjou, though his hands shook slightly from the adrenaline surging through his veins, felt a surge of relief at hearing Charles's command. Yet, even as he stood there, small, ragged, and out of place, he could not shake the overwhelming responsibility that now rested upon his young shoulders. His heart pounded with the conviction that, though he was just a boy from the fringes, he had done what was right. "I'm telling you," he repeated in a soft but unwavering tone. "I saw her pour that vial into your soup. Please, sir, don't eat it." His words, though barely audible at first, carried the weight of a life spent on the margins of society. A life in which every small act of decency was hard-won and fiercely guarded. Charles's eyes, lined with the burdens of decades of power, flicked to the boy with a mixture of curiosity and dawning respect. For a long moment his gaze held the unspoken question, who is this young man and what drives him to stand up when everyone else would simply look away? "André," he said softly, his voice almost tender as he gestured toward the empty chair opposite him. The boy hesitated only for a moment before shuffling over and settling into the seat, his hands still trembling as he clutched the edge of the table. Taking a long sip of water from his crystal glass, Charles continued in a low, thoughtful tone. "You saved me tonight." His eyes, now softened with gratitude, met André's. "Not just my life, but my integrity. I can't explain how much your courage means to me." The words, sincere and heavy with the weight of a lifetime, resonated deeply in the quiet aftermath of the storm that had just passed over the bistro. Around them, the patrons slowly resumed their hushed conversations, though no one dared to break the fragile silence that had been forged in the crucible of that fateful moment. Diana, meanwhile, stood apart, her once perfect features marred by humiliation and rage. As the crowd's attention shifted from the confrontation to the quiet, determined figure of the boy and the sorrowful dignity of the man he had saved. "You said you saw her do it," Charles murmured again, his gaze intent as he continued to study André's earnest expression. "And you're absolutely sure?" André's reply was steady, though his voice betrayed a hint of vulnerability. "Yes, sir, I saw everything. I know what I saw. I couldn't just stand by and let you be harmed." His words, simple and unwavering, cut through the remaining tension like a clarion call for truth. For a long, heavy moment, Charles sat in silence, lost in thought as he re-examined the details of the night, the subtle movements, the hushed exchanges, and the chilling calm with which Diana had carried out her deed. Finally, with a deep, shuddering sigh, he set his spoon aside. "Then we must determine the truth," he declared, his voice firm yet laced with sorrow. "I cannot allow this to go unanswered." Before Diana could muster a retort, the sound of approaching sirens cut through the silence. 2 uniformed police officers entered the bistro, their expressions serious and their presence commanding. The restaurant, once filled with the genteel clinking of fine dinnerware and murmurs of cultured conversation, now thrummed with the gravity of impending justice. One of the officers, a tall man with steely eyes, approached the table with measured steps, his gaze flickering first to Charles and then to Diana. "Ma'am," he said in a tone both neutral and authoritative, "we need you to step aside and allow us to examine the situation." Diana's face drained of color as she sputtered in protest, but Charles's firm interjection silenced her. "Please, let us handle this matter calmly," he said softly, his tone pleading yet resolute. The officers moved in methodically, their every action watched by an audience that now held its collective breath. One officer crouched down to sniff the soup, his eyes narrowing as he inhaled deeply. Another examined the table, his gloved hands steady as he took careful note of every detail. "It appears," the first officer said slowly, his voice measured and careful, "that there is a distinct aroma in the soup that should not be present." His words, delivered with clinical detachment, sent shockwaves through the assembled diners. The murmurs rose to a crescendo as Diana's face twisted with a mixture of anger and panic. "This is preposterous," she insisted, her voice trembling as she tried to muster a counter-argument. "I would never do such a thing," but even as she pleaded her innocence, Charles's eyes told a different story, a silent, pained acknowledgement that something was terribly amiss. André, sitting quietly at the table, felt an odd mix of vindication and apprehension. He had risked everything to speak out, and now the truth was finally being put to the test. His gaze never left Charles's as he whispered, "I'm telling you, sir, I saw it clearly." The words, heavy with the burden of his hard-fought honesty, resonated with the quiet dignity of one who had seen too much injustice in his life. The officers conferred briefly before one of them turned his attention to Diana. "Ma'am, would you kindly explain why there is an unusual substance in this soup?" he asked, his tone measured and firm. For a moment, Diana's polished facade faltered, and her carefully practiced denial seemed to crumble before the weight of evidence. I can explain," she began haltingly, but the words died in her throat as she realized the gravity of the situation. The room was silent once more, every eye fixed on her as the truth began to unravel like a tightly coiled thread. Unable to withstand the mounting pressure, Diana's defenses finally collapsed. "I'm tired of living in his shadow," she blurted out in a voice that wavered between fury and despair. "I'm tired of his control, of the life he forced me into. I've done everything for him, and yet I was never meant to live beyond this facade." Her voice cracked, and in that moment, the carefully curated illusion of perfection shattered completely. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the bistro as patrons realized they were witnessing a confession, raw and unfiltered. Charles's face went pale as the weight of her words struck him like a physical blow. For a long moment, he said nothing, his eyes locked on the trembling figure of his wife as she continued. I couldn't stand it any longer. I was going to ruin everything, and now I see that I have no excuse." Her admission hung in the air, a bitter revelation that left the once pristine atmosphere of the bistro sullied by betrayal and regret. Before anyone could process what had been revealed, the police officers stepped forward decisively. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for the attempted poisoning of Mr. Hargrove," the older officer announced in a voice that brooked no argument. Diana's eyes widened in terror as she struggled against the firm grip of the officers, her refined composure now a distant memory. You don't understand," she shrieked as she was led away, her protests echoing through the stunned silence of the dining room. In the aftermath of the arrest, as the officers escorted Diana out of the bistro and the murmurs of the crowd slowly subsided, Charles sank back into his chair. His hand trembled as he pushed the untouched bowl of soup away, his face a mask of disbelief and heartbreak. He turned his gaze toward André, whose youthful features were etched with both determination and apprehension. "Thank you, André," he said quietly, his voice filled with a sorrowful gratitude that seemed to make the entire room pause. "You saved my life today, not just from harm, but from a truth I had been blind to for far too long." André's eyes, still shining with unshed tears and a fierce resolve, met Charles's gaze. "I only did what I had to do," he replied softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I couldn't just stand by and watch someone get hurt." His words, simple and unadorned, carried the weight of a lifetime spent on the margins, of being ignored, overlooked, and underestimated by a society that valued wealth and status above all else. For a long moment, the once opulent riverside bistro was filled with a heavy silence, as if every patron was reflecting on the raw, painful lesson that had unfolded before them. Whispers of admiration for the brave young boy mingled with quiet murmurs of sorrow for a woman who had once worn her beauty like armor, now exposed as a flawed, desperate soul. Yet in that silence, a glimmer of hope emerged, a hope that integrity and courage, no matter how unassuming, had the power to change lives. Charles cleared his throat, and his voice, now filled with a gentle resolve, addressed the gathering. "We all have moments when we must choose between comfort and truth," he said slowly, his eyes softening as they rested on André. "Today this young man reminded me, and all of us, that true strength lies not in wealth or in appearances, but in the courage to stand up for what is right." His words, though quiet, seemed to echo through the room, leaving an indelible mark on every heart present. As the officers finished processing the scene and the bistro's patrons slowly began to disperse, Charles reached into his pocket and produced a sleek black cell phone. "Hold on a moment, André," he said, his voice soft yet determined. "I've arranged for some help. You deserve a safe place to rest tonight, somewhere you can start anew." He pressed a few buttons, and within minutes a taxi pulled up outside the bistro. "They're here," he added, smiling kindly at the young boy. "It seems that your bravery has not gone unnoticed." André, though still shaken, felt a warmth spreading through his chest, a feeling he had not experienced in a long time. "Thank you, sir," he whispered, his eyes glistening with a mixture of relief and awe. I just couldn't let it happen." Charles nodded, his gaze lingering on the boy as if committing every detail of his courage to memory. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "courage isn't about grand gestures or wealth. It's about doing the right thing, even when it's hard. even when no one else is watching. In that quiet moment, as the sunlight began to wane and the shadows of the bistro lengthened, Charles and André shared an unspoken understanding, a bond forged in the crucible of truth, and a promise that integrity would always triumph over indifference. The legacy of that day, with all its raw emotions and painful revelations, would live on in the hearts of those who had witnessed it. It was a reminder that even the smallest voice, when raised in defense of what is right, could change the course of history. As the taxi drove away with André safely inside, Charles took a long, contemplative sip of water from his crystal glass. The once pristine table before him bore the marks of a confrontation that had forever altered his life and that of his estranged wife. He stared at the now cold bowl of soup, the faint steam dissipating into the air, and felt an overwhelming sadness. The man who had built an empire, who had always believed in the power of appearances and the influence of wealth, now found himself humbled by the truth, a truth that had come from the most unlikely of sources. Outside, as the bistro's patrons resumed their subdued conversations and the memory of the incident began to fade like the echo of a distant storm, Charles made a silent vow. He would no longer allow his world to be defined solely by wealth, power, and the carefully curated facades that masked deeper truths. Instead, he would embrace the vulnerability of honesty, the power of compassion, and the unexpected strength found in those society deemed insignificant. In that moment, he realized that the true measure of a man was not in his bank account or the accolades he had accumulated, but in the willingness to confront one's own faults and to stand by the truth, even when it hurt. In the days that followed, Riverside Bistro became the subject of hushed conversations and viral recordings. News outlets, intrigued by the dramatic confrontation and the brave intervention of a homeless youth, covered the story extensively. Social media buzzed with hashtags celebrating the courage of the young boy, while many admired Charles Hargrove's eventual acknowledgement of his misjudgments. Yet not all responses were positive. Whispers of scandal and betrayal circled the corridors of high society, and Diana's fall from grace became a cautionary tale about the perils of unchecked ambition and the fragility of a carefully constructed life. For Charles, the experience was transformative. Late one evening, as he sat alone in his private dining room, he reviewed the events in his mind. The boy's resolute voice, Diana's desperate accusations, and the palpable tension that had gripped every soul in the room. In that reflective solitude, he penned a letter to himself, a promise to embrace the lessons of that day and to rebuild his world on a foundation of honesty and compassion. In our relentless pursuit of power, he wrote, we sometimes forget that the most profound truths come from the humblest of hearts. Today I have been reminded that integrity is not measured by the wealth we amass, but by the lives we touch through our actions. The words, raw and unadorned, would later serve as the cornerstone of his new philosophy, a guiding light in a world that had grown too accustomed to the superficial and the insincere. Meanwhile, André, whose life had been defined by survival on the cold streets and the neglect of a society that seldom cared, found himself at a crossroads. In the aftermath of that fateful day, the local community, moved by his courage, rallied to support him. A kind-hearted neighbor offered him shelter for the night, and word of his brave act reached a local youth center that specialized in mentoring troubled teens. For the first time in his life, André felt seen and valued, as if his voice, small and unassuming, had the power to change not only his destiny, but also the destiny of those around him. The encouragement and support he received ignited a spark within him, one that promised a future where his potential would no longer be wasted on the fringes of society. Over time, the ripples of that singular moment of bravery began to extend far beyond the confines of Riverside Bistro. The story was retold in local newspapers, on television, and across social media platforms as a symbol of how one act of integrity could challenge even the most entrenched systems of power. In schools and community centers, teachers and mentors used the tale as a lesson on standing up for what is right, even when it comes at a personal cost. And for Charles Hargrove, the incident marked the beginning of a gradual transformation. He began to re-examine his priorities, reaching out to philanthropic causes he had long ignored and seeking to mend the fractured relationships that had defined his personal life. As weeks turned into months, Riverside Bistro slowly regained its former splendor. Albeit with a newfound atmosphere of sincerity, and accountability. New policies were quietly implemented by management to ensure that every patron, regardless of their background, was treated with the dignity they deserved. The incident had forced even the most privileged among them to confront the deep-seated prejudices that lurked beneath the veneer of sophistication. And though Diana's role in the unfolding drama remained a painful chapter in the establishment's history, it also served as a catalyst for a broader dialogue on integrity, responsibility, and the true nature of power. One crisp autumn afternoon, as the golden leaves drifted lazily to the pavement outside, and the bistro filled once again with the soft murmur of conversations and the clink of glasses, Charles Hargrove invited Andre to join him at a quiet corner table. With a measured smile and a gentle tone that betrayed the turbulence of recent events, Charles said, "Today I want you to know that your courage has not only saved me, but it has also opened my eyes to the things that truly matter in life. Your actions remind us all that no matter how vast our fortunes may be, it is the simple truth of our humanity that defines us." Andre, still shy and wary of the attention, nodded slowly. "I'm just glad I could help," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. In that moment, a quiet understanding passed between them, a bond forged in the shared belief that even in the darkest of times, the light of integrity could never be extinguished. Over the next several months, as Riverside Bistro continued to serve as a gathering place for Westbridge's elite, the story of that fateful day took on a life of its own. It became a legend whispered in hushed tones among diners and recounted in public forums as an example of how the seemingly insignificant could upend even the grandest of establishments. Charles Hargrove, once a man who prized his wealth above all, began to embrace a more compassionate outlook. He dedicated himself to charitable endeavors, funding initiatives to support underprivileged youth and to foster community programs that celebrated honesty and resilience. Though his empire had been built on a foundation of ruthless ambition, he now strove to rebuild it with empathy as its cornerstone. For Andre, the impact of that single act of bravery was transformative. No longer relegated to the shadows of society, he found himself at the center of a movement that celebrated integrity and the power of the individual voice. With the support of local community leaders and a newfound confidence bolstered by his heroic actions, he eventually enrolled in an alternative education program that offered him a chance to forge a future beyond the hardships of his past. His story, captured on video and shared widely across social media, inspired countless others who had once felt invisible in a world that prized superficial appearances over genuine character. In time, the Riverside Bistro itself underwent subtle changes. The management, now keenly aware of the profound lessons that had unfolded on that tumultuous day, instituted a series of reforms aimed at ensuring that every guest was treated with the respect and kindness they deserved. The once unyielding hierarchy of the dining room softened, as staff members were encouraged to see each customer not as a number or a status symbol, but as a human being with a story of their own. This shift in attitude rippled outward, gradually transforming the establishment into a microcosm of the values that Charles Hargrove had come to cherish. As the months turned into a full year, the legacy of that extraordinary day became woven into the fabric of Westbridge's collective memory. The tale of the homeless youth who had dared to speak up, of a man who had been saved from the brink of ruin by a voice that many had chosen to ignore, and of a woman whose secrets had been laid bare for all to see, served as a reminder that truth and courage often reside in the most unlikely of places. Charles, once a symbol of untouchable wealth and power, now found solace in the quiet strength of integrity, a strength he had rediscovered through the eyes of a young boy. In quiet moments of reflection, as the golden light of sunset spilled through the bistro's tall windows, Charles would sometimes catch himself thinking of that day with a mixture of regret and gratitude. Regret for the years lost to pride and pretense, and gratitude for the clarity that had come from one voice, small and unassuming, that had dared to defy a world built on appearances. And while the memory of Diana's fall from grace remained a painful reminder of how fragile a facade could be, it also served as an enduring lesson that true power lies not in the manipulation of others, but in the steadfast commitment to one's own truth. For Andre, life had taken on a new dimension. His act of bravery, once seen as an anomaly in the eyes of the privileged, now stood as a beacon of hope for countless others who had endured similar hardships. Encouraged by community support and inspired by the knowledge that his actions had made a difference, He began to share his story with anyone who would listen, whether through impassioned speeches at local gatherings or quiet conversations in the corners of the city where hope was scarce. His words resonated deeply, reminding others that even in the face of overwhelming odds, a single act of honesty could spark a revolution of compassion. Then, one crisp winter morning, as the first light of dawn broke over Westbridge and the city slowly awakened to the promise of a new day, Charles Hargrove summoned Andre to a private meeting at his mansion, a sprawling estate that until then had symbolized the cold, unyielding nature of wealth. In the opulent drawing room, with its grand chandeliers and meticulously arranged art, Charles addressed the boy with a tenderness that belied his stern exterior. "Andre," he began softly, "your courage has saved more than just a meal tonight. It has given me the strength to confront my own failings. I want you to know that from this day forward, you have a place in my world. A world that, until now, I thought was impenetrable." Andre, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness, managed only a quiet nod. The sincerity in Charles's eyes, the unguarded vulnerability that shone through, was enough to make the young man believe that sometimes even the most hardened souls could change. I never thought someone like me could matter to someone like you," Andre whispered, his voice barely audible. Charles reached out and patted his shoulder gently. "Never underestimate the power of doing what is right," he replied. "In our darkest moments, it is the smallest voices that often bring the greatest light." In the days that followed, the story of the fateful confrontation at Riverside Bistro continued to reverberate through Westbridge, inspiring debates in coffee shops, discussions in boardrooms, and even thoughtful reflections on late-night television talk shows. The scandal, the raw emotion, and the undeniable truth of the incident had challenged the very foundations of the city's social order, and while Diana's reputation was irrevocably tarnished, the legacy of that day served as a powerful reminder that integrity, however fragile, could never truly be silenced. Charles Hargrove, emboldened by the transformative events, began a series of philanthropic initiatives aimed at bridging the gap between the city's haves and have-nots. He established scholarships for underprivileged youth, funded community centers in neglected neighborhoods, and even commissioned art installations that celebrated the unsung heroes of Westbridge, those ordinary souls who, like Andre, had the courage to speak out when injustice reared its ugly head. His actions, once driven solely by the pursuit of profit and prestige, now took on a deeper meaning, a mission to create a legacy that honored the inherent dignity of every human life. For Andre, the impact of that fateful day became a turning point. Supported by a network of mentors and community advocates, he enrolled in a vocational training program that opened doors to opportunities he had never imagined. His journey, from a homeless youth to a young man determined to rewrite his own destiny, became a symbol of hope for others who had long been relegated to the margins of society. In quiet moments, as he walked the bustling streets of Westbridge with a renewed sense of purpose, he recalled the words he had spoken that day, the plea for truth and the unwavering commitment to doing what was right, and he carried them like a badge of honor. Months later, on a cool spring afternoon when the city was in full bloom and the streets hummed with renewed energy, Riverside Bistro held a commemorative event in honor of that transformative day. Local leaders, community activists, and even some of the city's most prominent business figures gathered to celebrate the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of integrity. In an address that was both heartfelt and stirring, Charles Hargrove spoke of the day when a young voice had cut through the veneer of opulence, exposing the harsh realities of greed and deception. "Today we honor not only the bravery of one young man," he declared, "but also the truth that every one of us carries within. It is a truth that reminds us that our worth is not defined by the weight of our wallets or the glitz of our appearances, but by the kindness we extend to those in need. By the kindness we extend to those in need." The crowd erupted in applause, and as the event drew to a close, many left with a renewed belief in the power of small acts to create monumental change. In the quiet aftermath of that day's celebration, as the city of Westbridge slowly settled back into its familiar rhythm, Charles Hargrove found a moment to reflect on the series of events that had forever altered his life. Sitting alone in his study, surrounded by mementos of a bygone era of ruthless ambition, he penned a letter that would later become a cornerstone of his new philosophy. "There was a time when I believed that success was measured solely by wealth and power," he wrote, his handwriting deliberate and measured. "But today I have learned that true success lies in the strength of our character and the courage to stand by what is right, even when it means challenging those we hold dear." His words, imbued with the sincerity of a man reborn, echoed long into the night. For André, life continued to evolve in unexpected ways. The recognition he had received from the community spurred him to dream bigger than he ever had before. He began volunteering at local shelters, sharing his story with other at-risk youths, and even started a small community outreach program aimed at providing basic necessities to those who had once been invisible. His journey, once marked by hardship and neglect, was now illuminated by the promise of a brighter future. A future forged by the unyielding conviction that even the smallest voice could alter the course of history. As spring turned to summer, the ripples of that one courageous act spread far beyond the confines of Riverside Bistro. Local newspapers featured in-depth profiles of both Charles Hargrove and the brave young boy who had risked everything to speak the truth. Television interviews and online videos recounted the dramatic confrontation with Diana, now a cautionary tale of hubris and betrayal, and celebrated the unyielding determination of a community that refused to let injustice prevail, The story became a rallying cry for those who believed in fairness and accountability, inspiring many to stand up for what was right, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. Though the events of that day had forever changed the lives of those involved, perhaps the most profound transformation occurred within Charles Hargrove himself. Once a man whose identity had been defined solely by his vast fortunes and unassailable authority, he now saw himself through a different lens. A lens that recognized the beauty in vulnerability and the power of redemption. In quiet moments of introspection, he would often recall the earnest eyes of young André, the boy whose quiet act of defiance had revealed a truth that money and status could never buy. And in that remembrance, he found not only hope for a better future, but also the courage to redefine his legacy. Years later, as Westbridge evolved into a city renowned not only for its affluence, but also for its commitment to social justice and community empowerment, the story of that fateful day at Riverside Bistro remained etched in the collective memory of its citizens. It was recounted in school assemblies and community events, a living testament to the idea that integrity and courage are the true measures of one's worth. And while the face of Riverside Bistro might have changed over time, with new owners, refreshed decor, and an ever-shifting clientele, the spirit of that day endured. A constant reminder that every act of kindness, no matter how small, has the power to transform lives. In the end, what began as a moment of confrontation in a chic bistro had evolved into a movement that challenged the prevailing norms of privilege and prejudice and celebrated the undeniable truth that every human being, regardless of their station in life, deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. Charles Hargrove, once ensconced in a world of unassailable power, emerged from the ordeal with a newfound humility and a determination to use his resources for the greater good. André, whose voice had echoed above the clamor of a polished society, became a symbol of resilience and hope for countless others who had long been forgotten. And even Diana's downfall, as painful as it was, served as a stark lesson that no facade, no matter how flawless, could ever conceal the truth forever. So, as you sit and ponder the events of that unforgettable day, ask yourself, what would you do if you witnessed an injustice unfolding before your eyes? Would you have the courage to speak up, even if it meant defying the powerful and risking everything? In a world where so many choose silence over integrity, it is the brave who remind us that every single act of honesty has the power to change the course of history. The legacy of that day lives on in every heart that dares to stand for what is right, in every voice that refuses to be silenced by fear or indifference, and in every soul that believes that true power is found not in wealth or status, but in the simple, unyielding commitment to do what is just. And as the sun sets on another day in Westbridge, its golden rays illuminating a city that has learned to cherish the value of honesty, we are reminded that sometimes the smallest voices can inspire the mightiest changes. In the quiet aftermath of chaos, when the clamor of daily life returns and the wounds of betrayal slowly begin to heal, let this story serve as a beacon of hope. Let it remind you that no matter how daunting the world may seem, every act of courage and every moment of truth has the potential to ignite a ripple effect. One that can transform not just a single life, but entire communities. And perhaps in the midst of our own struggles and the noise of a divided society, we too can find the strength to speak up, to stand firm in our convictions, and to let our voices carry the promise of a brighter, more compassionate future. For Lila, no longer just a quiet waitress at a refined bistro, but a symbol of unyielding integrity, the memory of that fateful confrontation would forever be etched in her heart. It was a day when the veneer of wealth and privilege was stripped away, revealing a raw, honest truth that resonated with everyone present. And for all those who heard her story, it became a call to action, a reminder that in the end, it is not the grandeur of our surroundings or the weight of our bank accounts that defines us, but the simple, sometimes painful choices we make in the pursuit of what is right. Thus, when you find yourself facing a moment of decision, when the scales of justice and morality tip precariously in the balance, remember the story of that cold Saturday morning at Riverside Bistro. Remember the homeless youth whose brave cry shattered the silence. The powerful man who learned that even the mightiest among us can be humbled by truth. And the woman whose carefully constructed facade crumbled under the weight of her own ambition. And above all, remember that every act of kindness, every whispered word of truth, has the potential to create a ripple that echoes far beyond what the eye can see. In a world that often prizes wealth, status, and superficial appearances above all else, it is the quiet, unassuming moments of honesty and compassion that remind us of our shared humanity. They teach us that, no matter how small or insignificant we may feel, our actions have the power to change lives. To build bridges where there were once walls, to heal wounds that time had made deep, and to forge a legacy that endures long after the moment has passed. So, as you step out into the world each day, may you carry with you the spirit of that remarkable moment at Riverside Bistro. A moment when a simple, desperate cry for justice transformed an entire community, proving once and for all that true strength lies in the courage to do what is right, even when the world seems to be against you.